You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rokfin, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. I want to go to giants. I want to explore the aspects and your understanding of these giants, or Nephilim. The common theme is that these are indeed spiritual entities that were created by fallen angels, and it was the product of these angels mating with human women. Is that correct?
Correct. And in all accounts, it's the same story. So you have, let's say in Greek mythology, the definition of demigods is the offspring of a god or a goddess and a human male or a human female. And then that is a word that sort of goes back into prehistory. And that you have, for example, Zeus being the father of Hercules through alchemy. So it's exactly the same story, and that's a post-Diluvian story, which is similar to how giants probably show up again, at least in part, depending on how you view, they show them up after the flood with the Rephaim. So these were preternatural beings who had an ability to take a human form, and they could take any gender by deduction with the goddess and god aspect of the pantheon. How do we know angels can take a bodily form? Because they're spiritual beings in the Bible. And to interact physically in the physical world, you need a physical body. You may have limited interaction as the spiritual essence, but to take the full interaction, you need a physical body. So in the book of...
Now, are we talking possession or just being incarnated at birth as this angel?
Just actually creating it. And I'll explain that in a second, as opposed to incarnation or avatara are two different concepts. So, but we can get into that. So in the book of Genesis, in the Sodom story, and just before the two angels go to Sodom, you have three beings that take a physical form. One being the angel of the Lord, which is the pre-existent Jesus, Jehovah of the Elohim. And you have two angels, and they're not even recognized as preternatural beings at first, but then later recognized. So they look exactly like humans, and they eat, and they talk, and they drink, and they touch, and they've created these bodies for themselves. And another class, I won't go through all the examples, but just to give a couple, and there's a New Testament. For the New Testament, people say, well, what does the New Testament say about that? Is that in the book of Hebrews, we're told that we need to be good to strangers because you don't know when you're going to run into an angel. In other words, you won't be able to recognize them because they can take a physical bodily form and you wouldn't know the difference. And at Sodom, they want to have sex with these angels, whether it was hetero or homosexual, and you can make an argument for either on that. And so what is required is something called a dwelling place for the spirit in the physical world to interact physically. And so in Jude 1:6, it talks about the angels that sinned, they left their habitation. And that's the Greek word oikoterion, and it means a dwelling place for the spirit. We get that word used one other time. There are associated words that are similar, but specifically for the dwelling place for the spirit, it's also used in 2 Corinthians 5:2 for the house in heaven, another dwelling place. And so a meaning for a dwelling place of the spirit, both in the spiritual realm, and you need one for the physical realm. And so they created these dwelling places for their spirit so that they could pass on DNA, so that they could procreate, to create these physical beings who had an immortal spirit passed on to them by an immortal being. At least in the first few generations, they were immortal. And so this is a concept that most people don't want to sort of cross over, except that we get biblical accounts of them taking a physical form that makes it capable. And they might rely on the book of Matthew, where it says, in heaven there's no marriage. Well, of course there's no marriage. They're immortal beings, and it's against the law. In the physical realm, it may be against the law to do what they did, and one of the reasons why they went to the abyss. But they were able to do it, but to procreate with physical beings, they needed to have a physical form. Doesn't mean that they couldn't do other DNA manipulation with technologies to do other things, but to procreate, they needed to be able to copulate. And so this is a concept that is, once you start to understand how this works, then you can start to look at the difference between possessing and entering into a body, as in the Avatar effect. So giants, when they lost their immortal spirit in Genesis 6:3, in the creation story of the giants, between Genesis 6:1 and 4, their life, all life on earth in the physical realm is going to be limited to 120 years. Now, the physical immortal spirit of the original Nephilim, and probably the immortal Rokfin, if they're created after the flood, is not going to die. And it's a counterfeit spirit. It's a reprobate spirit. And it's not permitted into heaven, and it's not permitted to sleep like humans. So it's going to become, when that body dies, and that's what the age was put on, is whether or not they were killed or they died of just the body giving away. They became disembodied spirits, and that they roam the earth. So these are the ones that possess humans. So they need to take over a human host, suppress it in a hostile takeover to interact in the physical world, because they want a place of rest and they want to be able to interact in the physical world again. We get accounts of this in the New Testament with Jesus dealing with all sorts of devils, unclean spirits, and evil spirits, as the King James Version Bible talks about. And they're all talking about the same type of being. And one even includes legion, where you have multiple of them that can enter into a specific host. And that word devil goes back to the Greek word daemon, which is the root word for demon in English, and should probably be translated as a demon spirit, as opposed to devil, that's used for Satan, which is diablos, a whole different word. And now, diablos is the leader, the absolute leader of all angels and counterfeit spirits, including the demons.
Now, when we're talking about the physical incarnation of giants, how giant are we talking? How large of beings were they? There's different researchers have different accounts depending on the information that they are basing this off of. So what would you think? How big are these beings?
Well, it depends on a couple of things. One is if we're talking about a giant after the flood or a giant before the flood. So giants before the flood had more capabilities and were seemingly quite a bit larger than the giants after the flood. So it's hard to get reliable.
Let me ask you, is it because you think the atmosphere was different and everything may have been a little larger at that time? Could that be possible?
Well, if it was, and I don't think it was that different because we only had a flood. But if it was, then to be a giant, let's say the descendants of Adam were bigger, right? Then the giants would have to be bigger still because they were giant in comparison to the humans. So it doesn't really matter. I don't think it was the case because Noah survives the flood and his 3 sons and their daughters, and they're not giants. And now Gnostics will depict them as giants, but that's, again, depending on maybe which side of the fence that you're on that one. But their lineages recorded do not take them back to being giants. So when we talk about the antediluvian giants, we get a couple of measurements in the book of Enoch from different translations, but the trouble is we don't have the original Hebrew. That was a full manuscript. So in the Aramaic version, which would be a height of what they would have listed as 300 cubits, which a cubit is 1.5 feet, or if it's a royal cubit, it would be 21 inches.